Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 285 of our regular shows, and we're recording this one on February 16th, 2025. This is the official podcast for the fan site Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com. I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So on today's show, as usual, we will be doing some news, of which there is actually a decent bit now. And then we'll be doing two episodes as part of our kind of re-review series. So for Avatar, we're going to be reviewing The City of Walls and Secrets. And for Korra, we're going to be starting Book 3 Change with A Breath of Fresh Air. So we'll get to those later, but we'll start for now with the news. So we'll start with this one here, which is a follow-up on something we touched on last podcast with the news, which was that the Avatar Legends changes happening to some of the social medias. When I think we covered it last time, the official YouTube account had changed their username, their @username, from Team Avatar to Avatar Legends. Now their full kind of username and channel name, or like public screen name, has also changed to Avatar Legends. So the full thing is, it's Avatar Legends @Avatar Legends now. Otherwise, nothing has really changed. They haven't made like a public announcement about it, but notably that was like a 2-stage process that happened. And doing that obviously required them to do a lot of stuff behind the scenes, because it's like the username of your account. The other thing that's happened is that it seems like maybe they have an official Blue Sky account. It doesn't seem to be active right now, but notably it doesn't seem to just be like someone randomly made an Avatar Legends account on Blue Sky and just left it like that. It's avatarlegends.com, but it's also @avatarlegends.com. Whereas usually, if you just sign up normally to Blue Sky, your username is going to be like, mine is @airspeedprime.bsky.social. They don't have that because they've done the kind of domain name kind of registration thing. Avatarlegends.com currently just redirects to nick.com, I believe, or nick.co.uk in my case, still does. They haven't posted anything yet. There's no avatar imagery on it. People just randomly happen to come across this, but it's something that might be ready to go. And I think the timing of the YouTube switching over, now them maybe having this, kind of interesting. What do you make of this? This is another few weeks, and there's more social media changes happening. What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like what we've been talking about, them trying to actually get a consistent name. It's everything. A brand that makes sense going forward. So feels like that's what they're working towards, which is, cool to see that they're making progress on that, and that, hopefully this leads to bigger things within the whole franchise. So I guess that's really the hope of them actually, putting all this effort into doing this, since, it does require some effort to do this, especially in the most official capacity of things.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see if it actually leads to anything, but at least it's subtle stuff happening in the background. The next two news points are also Avatar Legends focused. The first one is a negative one, and that is that the Bending Academy chapter book, which is also based on when we had the listing, was listed as an Avatar Legends novel as well. This has been taken down, but it was taken down after initially it got a release date change. Previously, it was part of a group of books coming out all on July 1st, along with the How to Draw book and some other stuff. Then it got changed to, I think, September 2nd, but then the listing was completely removed. The other thing to note about the Bending Academy book was that it was only ever listed on Edelweiss. No other website ever had a listing for this book, which gave me the impression that it probably went up too early, and it was like, okay, it was another one of those kind of Beast of the Four Nations situations where they just maybe just forgot that this was automatically scheduled to go up, and then they eventually took it down. I don't view this as necessarily the book's been like cancelled or anything like that. I do still sort of view it as it just went up a bit too early. They weren't ready to properly promote it, and we'll probably hear about this in the coming months, because again, if it is moved to September, we just got a book announced, we'll get to it for July. It's not quite the correct timing now, but interesting that it was an Avatar Legends book, and then we got another Avatar Legends book announced. This was obviously a kids novel. We didn't know too much about it, but it was meant to be about, kids, like random kids in the Earth Kingdom. We'll see what they do with this going forward, but I just thought this was interesting, kind of given what happened before and then what happened afterwards. But what do you view this, the kids novel, the information being taken down?
Yeah, it does feel like it could be the idea of it being too early. I mean, it seemed like there was enough there that it was a real thing, but we've said that before, right? And we're still waiting on one of the other ones. So
I don't know. Usually with the kids' book, they're usually pretty good about getting them out, even if, no one really notices or checks them out because, they're for a different age bracket for a lot of the older fans. But yeah, I do hope it still comes out because it did seem, interesting for the audience it was geared towards.
Yeah, and I think it works that, like, the plan going forward would be, like, 2 kind of YA books plus 1 kids book to have that kind of different demographics going on. And especially it being Penguin Random House, them getting into doing, like, an Avatar Legends novel, that seemed kind of cool. But yeah, I suspect we'll hear about it at some point soon. I'd be a little bit more down on this if it was, like, listed everywhere and got removed everywhere, like Beast of the Four Nations, but I do think Edelweiss maybe just got ahead of things. And we've had other situations where they've taken down marketing points on those Edelweiss listings as well. But speaking of books, out of nowhere, though, there was a little bit of a sense that we were maybe thinking something like this could have happened. A new Abrams Books novel series for Avatar announced. So this is in addition to Chronicles of the Avatar. This is the Avatar Legends series of novels. So this is the announcement both of it being an ongoing series, but also what the first book in that series is. This is Avatar Legends, City of Echoes. It is about Jin. Jin from the Tales of Ba Sing Se is the focus character of this first novel here. The intent of this series is that it is a new series featuring the unsung heroes behind legendary events within the world of Avatar and Korra. So, very exciting stuff. To quickly explain why I said it was not fully unexpected, Abrams had a blank listing on their website for a while called like a Untitled YA Amulet action series. And it always came up when you searched Avatar, but there was no information on it. This is that book. The ISBN number matches, the release date that it had previously when it was Untitled matches. So this has obviously been in the works for quite a while. I think we've had that listing on the website for well over a year, which gives me the impression it's part of this new Avatar Legends kind of moving forward with the franchise type thing, and that realistically the Chronicles of the Avatar books also should be under Avatar Legends, but I think this is just their way to kind of slightly separate it out. We'll get into the details on the book individually in a moment, but just overall, what are your thoughts on this as a new series here? Avatar Legends, a novel series focused on minor characters, unsung heroes?
Yeah, I think it's a neat thing to do, and it gives us another look into behind the series and the franchise and, the other parts that we don't know yet. I don't know if it's something that I would have particularly sort of thought, that they would do it in this sort of way. But, I think it can work pretty well as far as giving us a bit more stuff and maybe gearing it towards a little bit of a different audience that's still into reading the books and stuff like that. So I think, the idea of it at a high level is a cool one to pursue and see how it pans out.
Mm-hmm. I'll read some of the marketing points and then we'll get into the details on the book. It says here that so far Chronicles of the Avatar has sold more than 1 million copies across all formats. With the introduction of the Avatar Legends series, we plan to publish 2 Avatar titles per year. There was some confusion about this, of people thinking that this is just the next Avatar novel, so are we stopping the Avatar series after Roku Book 2? But no, the plan is that both will continue, which makes sense. They're highlighting how successful Chronicles of the Avatar has been. This is in addition to that. So yeah, this is a spin-off series basically for fans of the popular Chronicles of the Avatar series, and then there's a little bit more detail on what exactly the series is about. It's a series of standalone novels highlighting the unsung heroes within the Avatar universe, highlighting the ways that they have shaped legendary events in Avatar history. The novels will also feature encounters with familiar fan-favorite characters along each protagonist's journey. This new angle sets Avatar Legends apart from Chronicles of the Avatar, which uses a duology format to tell Avatar's origin stories. So they're making that point quite strongly here about this is more about the background characters, and the main characters will be sort of cameo minor characters in their stories rather than we typically see the reverse. So pretty exciting stuff. But let's get into the description here. So like I said, it's a City of Echoes. We do have the cover. It's by Judy I. Lin. It's coming out 22nd of July 2025, which of course would be the traditional like Chronicles of the Avatar novel release window. I think probably explaining to us why Awakening has been delayed into like October pretty late is just to create a separation between these books. It is a full hardcover book. It's YA. It's 368 pages apparently, so it's basically the exact same format as Chronicles of the Avatar. And the description for this one is, there is no war outside of these walls. This is what the citizens of Ba Sing Se are told to believe, but Jin knows better. As a refugee whose parents were killed by the Fire Nation, she is haunted by her past. Now she does her best to keep her head down in the lower ring, caring for her ailing grandfather and balancing school with survival. Her one bright spot is her best friend Susu, whose family treats Jin like one of their own, and whose bakery she helps make deliveries for. Her world shatters when Susu's father gambles away the bakery, and Susu is forced to take a contract in the upper ring to pay off the family's debt. Jin vows to help her friend no matter what it takes. A chain of events fueled by her desperate promise leads Jin to Xuan, an arrogant boy from the middle ring with ties to the Silver Fangs, a major player in the city's black market. The deeper Jin delves into her double life, the more she learns about Susu's own entanglement in a conspiracy darker and more dangerous than she could have imagined. As whispers swirl of the Avatar's presence within the city's walls, the Fire Nation creeps ever closer. With Ba Sing Se teetering on the brink of revolution, Jin must defy the powerful forces that control her city and risk everything for the friend she's determined to save. So, full-on story here for Jin just prior to her appearance in ATLA, because we're talking about she's heard rumors of the Avatar's presence within the walls. Otherwise, there's very little background information canon right now about Jin. They seem to be slightly retconning some stuff, where if you look at the old lore, it seems to suggest that her parents are actually still alive, but they're struggling to survive in the city, whereas they're going with the idea here that actually her parents were killed, and her ailing grandfather is, like, I guess, her main surviving family member. Otherwise, this is all completely new stuff, and a way to explore Ba Sing Se under, I guess, the Long Feng conspiracy. What are your thoughts on this as our first story in Avatar Legends?
It's intriguing. I think, at least the way that they break down the description and her life before, everything that we've actually seen of her in person. I think it, sets the stage for a pretty cool story. It has some intrigue behind it that, it's something that, I don't think we would have necessarily thought of many of this. I mean, we don't really know a lot of the, minutia of stuff that happened there before the Avatar was really, other than, all the rumors, that sort of stuff. So it's cool to get a little bit of that, in a current period of time that we are actually, generally familiar with, rather than something that's completely new, way far back, or, something else. So no, I think this is, actually kind of cool that it sounds like they really put the effort into fleshing out this story and giving us something that could really be cool to read.
It's interesting because it's obviously going to allow us to explore Ba Sing Se in a lot more detail, because they highlight, like, she's from the lower ring, she's going to meet someone in the middle ring, and we're going to eventually go to the upper ring. So it's going to cover pretty much all areas of Ba Sing Se, which is interesting. It seems like we'll eventually get into the conspiracy a little bit. So I wonder how much Jin ends up actually finding out, and how this book ends in a way where Jin is just in a, I suppose, nice enough situation where she's kind of looking for romance like immediately afterwards. So it'll be interesting to see what they do here, because Jin is definitely not the first character I would have thought of if you told me just the idea for this series of like a minor character getting a book. She's on the list, I think, somewhere. I think most people find her a memorable and likable minor character. But this is a bit of a surprise, definitely. They've gone for maybe one of the lower kind of end minor characters rather than someone who's a little bit more notable. But I do think the opportunity to explore Ba Sing Se probably is a big part of why she was chosen. And it'll be interesting to see what happens here. I find probably the most interesting line is that with Ba Sing Se teetering on the brink of revolution, that is something that in City of Walls and Secrets we don't get any sense of. So are they going to do a thing where like there was a revolution about to happen and it gets put down like just prior to like Aang and everyone else's arrival, which is why things maybe seem a little bit more cold and things are so controlled, as we're going to see in the episode later on. What's your take on that? The Ba Sing Se teetering on the brink of revolution, and the idea that apparently this is going to be sort of that like characters who will shape events in Avatar history, that like Jin was involved to a certain degree in an event just prior to Aang's arrival that maybe shaped the way things ended up going or something like that.
I mean, I think the idea of that could be cool. I mean, it kind of feels like what we saw in the live action version of Avatar, right? So they had that sort of thing where they almost were trying to get together to stop the Fire Lord, but it didn't pan out. So it wouldn't feel uncommon, that would sort of be a thing. I definitely wouldn't have thought that Jin was involved in that. We don't really get enough of her character, right, to really get an idea of what she might have been involved with. So, in that way, I guess it's a clean slate, so it could work, well enough in that regard. But I don't know. I mean, it definitely feels like something that could have happened and they could have squashed pretty quietly, and, we would never even know about it considering how the Dai Li was.
Yeah, the Dai Li definitely are I think are going to be in here to a certain degree, but it definitely leaves room for a lot of interesting stuff to go on. We're going to learn, I guess, about the black market through these Silver Fangs, bakery, the fact that they mention her going to school. Some of this stuff we don't know like a ton about in Ba Sing Se. And yeah, it covers all the different rings of the city, so it should be exciting. And again, it's a 360 plus page novel. So we're going to get some depth here, which is interesting. And then it's an ongoing series that seems to involve everything, because notably the titling, the stuff on the cover it's Avatar Legends. It's not Avatar The Last Airbender. And I suppose getting into the cover a little bit, some interesting stuff for sure. City of Echoes, we see Ba Sing Se and stuff like that. We see the walls. Jin is present on the cover. We see that besides the Avatar Legends logo, they do have the Earth symbol to, I guess, highlight some nation kind of bending theming for the book. So that will, I guess, change depending on who the character is as the series goes forward. Otherwise, I think probably one of the more mysterious kind of parts of it is the green ribbon that goes like throughout the logo and stuff like that around Jin. That is not really like something that like is notable about her character. Like, she doesn't seem to have a distinct green ribbon, so is that part of the story or what? I'm not really sure what to make of that. Is it going to be some connection between her and Susu? It's a little bit unclear. But what are your thoughts on the cover?
Yeah, I mean, the cover design itself I really like. I think that's pretty nice. But yeah, I do wonder if there's an extra meaning to that, or I don't know, even if it's just like even the position of it, or where they're at in the city, how does that play to things? I don't know. It's interesting to see what the covers actually mean when you actually read them.
Yeah, and then the title. I think I forgot almost to comment on the title, but like City of Echoes, Ba Sing Se is the City of Echoes in some way. Like, what does that really mean? Is it going to be about like something that happens in one of the rings echoes into the other ones, and this is maybe where the revolution comes from? I'm not really sure. So there is some very interesting stuff going on here, just because it's it is tied into ATLA, so there is that appeal. But then it's a character who's kind of surprising with kind of how minimal she is involved in the series. It'll be interesting to see how this one does overall. Since I covered it on like YouTube, and I think I was like the first one to find this as well online before they officially posted about it. Pretty universal like positivity, I think. A few people going like, "Who's Jin?" But I think most people get the idea of the series and kind of what's going on, and especially once there was the realization that it's not replacing Chronicles of the Avatar, people felt a lot better about it. So, it should go pretty well, and the fact that it's not too far away either is pretty good. Like it's announced here in February ahead of a July release. We're still probably going to have to wait until like June for like preview pages probably, but we're going to get there sooner rather than later, and it helps ease the kind of problem that was like, oh, first year without a July novel. Well, they've solved that now, and we still get the other novel, so that will be interesting. A final thing is just, I suppose, do you have any other obvious characters who you think should get Avatar Legends books, given that they seem to have a bit of a criteria here for it being unsung heroes, minor characters, but who are sort of connected to things, kind of. I've gone through the list of characters quite a bit, and I think it's kind of hard to predict, like, on the Avatar side of things. I'm like, Haru, Teo, like, does it have to be a teenage young character? Are we allowed to do adult characters in a YA novel with these books? Because clearly the Chronicles series is locked to teenage avatars. Korra especially, I think there's maybe a little bit of an issue there of, like, Tano. Other than that, I'm kind of like Opal, Kai, the Beifong children. I'm not sure who obviously fits, but does anyone spring to mind for you for a book 2 or 3?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm not sure. I mean, Haru would be a good one. I mean, they're minor characters that don't. I mean, any of the Beifongs, they feel like they might be too, like they're already too popular. Like, I think that would be cool and that would sell well. But that's like, they're like minor, major characters in my mind, so I wouldn't particularly pick them as ones to go for. I don't know. I mean, there's tons of minor characters, but are they like worth it to go back that far? And yeah, the whole thing, do they have to be teenagers? Like, I don't know, like the herbalist I'm thinking of. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple. I mean, there's all the Fire Nation kids that Aang interacted with before when he was undercover. Those ones might be cool just to see how the school was before Aang got there, and then how it was after him. I don't know. There's some characters there that might be cool. I don't know.
Yeah, and then there's also that idea of does it always have to be a sort of like prequel with that character, or can it be a post character appearance thing? Where like Haru, I don't really think there's that much to tell with a pre-imprisoned story. So it either has to be a in between his appearances, like in between imprisoned and the invasion, or what's Haru up to post series. And the same for like I think a lot of the characters is that it's probably more interesting to catch up with a lot of them after their appearance. But it's hard to tell. My go-tos right now are probably like Tano or Toza for like a pro-bending kind of sports drama focused novel. I think that would work quite well to be a little bit of a different genre style book. Maybe like Chit Sang I always like, so I'd like to know like what his deal was. Like, he lives somewhere in the Fire Nation. What did he do to get caught by the soldiers or the police? Where's he from? Did he actually do anything wrong, or is it just he did something really relatively minor, but he got thrown into the boiling rock, so it must have been something kind of big. Those are the things I think of, but I'm like, are they going to do a Chit Sang book? But at the same time, if you told someone there's a Jin book coming, like I sort of teased before I fully like revealed that I found all this stuff, there was a little bit of confusion about it. So you can't really rule anyone out necessarily, but it's also, I don't think there's any obvious second pick until I think we see this book and what exactly it's capable of doing, really. But it's definitely exciting. It's the first sign of publishing properly ramping up in terms of a proper announcement. The Bending Academy book was kind of that, but this is properly that. Doubling the novel output is huge. I do want to see if Dark Horse will follow suit. Like, I think they really badly need to put out some extra stuff. They can't just, I think, keep going on with just Korra one-shot, Avatar one-shot, because they already have to announce the next books in that series. But then I think we are expecting other stuff as well. So I hope in the coming months we do find out about a lot of that stuff, because pretty much by the time we get to this time next month, the Mako comic will be out. We'll be like a week and a bit away from Ashes of the Academy. And then after that, that's all the new comics for the year outside of the Free Comic Book Day book. They need to make some announcements for later in the year and for next year as well. Abrams seems set. I'm not so sure about Dark Horse, but do you have any thoughts on that? Like, this is definitely publishing ramping up, but like, what do you expect some of the other publishers to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this feels like, they did say that, and it definitely feels like a ramp up of sorts. And, there is other stuff down the pipeline that should help bolster the whole sort of franchise, right? At least I guess that's what their goal is and their hope is for, right? But yeah, as far as Dark Horse and the comics and other outlets, I don't know. I mean, I would hope they come back with the comics in full force, like we've sort of had them. It's unfortunate that they've sort of dropped off considering everything else, but we can see that things are having to work together better now, or hopefully everything coming. So that's my hope with that. The future media, the products and stuff like that, which expect more other media products to be coming out as well. It does sort of feel like it's a repeat of before, where things were just a little bit too early yet again. So hopefully time out well in that.
Yeah, especially now that it feels like this novel series is kind of like they kind of stole the one-shot idea basically for novels. Like, let's focus on a character, sometimes a minor character. Dark Horse definitely need to respond in some way, but we'll see. Next piece of news is Mike DiMartino had an interview on the Illustration Department podcast. It is, I guess, mostly kind of about Avatar. I haven't listened to the whole thing. I kind of skimmed through it to find the kind of key parts. But like CBR, Comic Book Resources, put up an article about it, like kind of highlighting that, he teases stuff about the new stuff. And it's kind of like, not really. I do think it's a little bit of a clickbaity headline in that this is pretty low level Avatar Studios news, in that, like, sure, technically he responds to a question that ultimately is about new content, but like, you don't really take much from what he actually says. The gist of this is that they eventually get to talking, and they talk about Aang and Korra, and how Korra kind of was developed as a character, like, to make her unique. They made her the opposite of Aang, but also she had to deal with some of the issues that happened kind of during the end of Aang's kind of era as the Avatar. And then the question gets brought up, like, sort of, hey, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but is that same sort of connected idea between the eras going to happen with the new stuff? And Mike basically gives the answer of just like, it's gonna all be connected. It's definitely, the new stuff is connected, and that's basically it. So it's sort of a very, very rough sort of confirmation that, like, I guess the next series is the next Avatar, if he's answering the question in that way. But he does very specifically avoid properly highlighting the question and answering about the next Avatar type thing. Obviously the podcast was recorded well after the leaks happened, so I don't know what the situation is there. Is that what the person asking the question was kind of going for? Because they seem to be running with the idea that, like, the series is the kind of confirmed project, not the movie, which might kind of later kind of confirmed. But this is one of those ones where, like, I think it's important to maybe note this, just because it is technically the first time he's ever commented about the series in any sort of detail, but it's not really any sort of detail. What do you make of this comment on this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't take too much from it, because it's not really focusing on just the new stuff in that sort of way. Like, we're still too far out for them to really say anything, of substantialness about, the series or the movie at all. So I don't know. I mean, things have always been interconnected with Avatar. That's the reason why we like it. And, things have ramifications and characters have to react to it, and it goes across the generation eras, right? So that's sort of Avatar's whole thing. So, it'd be odd if they didn't keep that in line with things, as far as, I'm thinking.
Yeah, that is the other side of it. The answer is like obvious. They're not just going to be like, yeah, this is just completely unconnected. Like Korra is the previous Avatar, but yeah, none of this is actually linked in. If you look at the leaks, it is obviously linked in. Like it's meant to be, I guess, part of the mystery of the new show is like what happened at the end of the Korra era to kind of make things this way, and then how do we reverse it? It seems to be the core mystery / plot. So they're obviously going for that. We just have to wait for any sort of announcement, obviously. There are a few other things where like he kind of alludes to stuff about the new stuff. Like he does confirm like, yeah, that the movie is the first project. So just any sense that the series subtly gets announced and is the first thing, that is not actually going to happen. The movie's up first, for sure. He did answer a question, I think, earlier in the podcast as well about art styles, just highlighting that basically the new content stuff is all, I think, going to have a similar, I think what Mike calls anime-inspired art style, which I just took to mean like it's all going to be along the lines of what Avatar has looked like in Avatar and Korra. He says the only difference, I suppose, between project to project is just going to be the kind of level of detail, depending on what the project actually is. And then he talked about the sort of Avatar Korra differences in that. The reason like Avatar and Korra are so respected to a certain degree as animations is because a lot of the character designs are quite complicated to animate in the way they want them to, and that's going to be one of the big differences. That's probably the more kind of insightful piece of news, I think, maybe coming out of this than what people are talking about, just because he sort of alluded to the series. But even that is sort of like, I think Brian has basically said that before in interviews. So they're open to talking vaguely about sort of creative kind of processes, but nothing specific is ever being talked about just yet. It is getting quite frustrating that like, everyone wants to ask them stuff, but it's so clear they can't talk. But like, when are they actually going to be able to talk? I'm eager to see how different they come across in interviews when they finally are open to speak about things, because I do get the impression like every time they're on like the Brave and the Elements podcast, there's a weird nervousness with them when the new stuff ends up coming up, because I think they're just so cautious about giving anything away. But what are your thoughts about that? Just like when will the floodgates finally open, and your thoughts on Mike and Brian in interviews?
Yeah, the floodgates. I don't know. Until the products are actually officially, out there in terms of like even like a teaser trailer or something along those levels. Like I still, can see them being hesitant in almost all interviews, just because that's how media and entertainment and stuff works. Like I think it's kind of a surprise somewhat that we're getting as much information as it is. And, part of it is just people just, looking around for it and stuff like that. Like, they haven't really said too much on their own, even up until this point. So, there's really only so much that we can, hope to get out from them in general. But, I think, it is nice when we do get to hear their sort of, background thoughts and things, and, even comparing what they've done in the past to what they're currently doing. And, sort of the reasons why it's such a standout show that it is, which, like you said, that whole idea of the animation level and the quality and stuff like that, like, they've talked about that many times before, but, there's a new generation, there's new people, so it's cool to see them getting it out there again for those who, who haven't heard it in the past. So I think that's cool. And yeah, just, it's one of those reasons why it stands out, and, we're still talking about it till this day. So, no, I think it's cool.
Yeah, and there is other stuff like that. Like, I think some of the other bits and pieces that are not maybe news focused, but like he says stuff like, say, Korra. The hosts, I think, asked about, like, was it a purposeful thing that, like, you made it more mature? And Mike basically talked about how, like, yeah, it was to the point where, like, Nick didn't even know what to do with the show because it was so different than everything else that they had. So I don't think he would be saying that so openly if things weren't different now, like under Avatar Studios. Even though technically, like, Nickelodeon is still involved, they obviously have confidence that, like, I guess they could do another core level thing and it will be like treated correctly here, because Paramount is obviously backing the entire franchise going forward with like multiple projects, which is a complete contrast to things happening before. This is why like there is a little bit of negativity, I think, in the fandom surrounding everything, just because we haven't heard anything. But I think there is an overall positivity to what's happening here, that like if you look at everything happening, all these different projects, publishing, Avatar in concert, the soundtrack happening, finally a AAA game. This is stuff that wouldn't happen if there wasn't the support from Paramount and there wasn't a big plan to properly relaunch the franchise. It's just, we're on the verge of it, like about to properly happen. And it's just like, when is that going to happen? What's that going to look like? Is it just going to be like a trailer hits one day and it's like, yeah, we're ready to go? Or will they make more of a franchise announcement style thing? It's hard to kind of predict at the moment what it is going to be, but I suppose we'll maybe try to. With the final piece of news, I guess, is just, hey, the next potential opportunity for news is coming up next week. February 21st is going to be the 20-year anniversary of the franchise. So February 21st, 2005 was the day The Boy and the Iceberg kind of aired, starts the franchise publicly. A big anniversary. Like this is not one of these ones where I think you can just like do something super minimal. I hope they don't do that. I think with the timing they have, where we talk about how it's a bit too early, but it's also like we're basically within range where I think just for any sort of a movie or a project, they should be beginning to talk about this stuff to get it to the point where people know a movie is coming out. And I think an anniversary and a big one where people are going to be talking about Avatar that day, it could be an opportunity for them to say something, like an initial announcement, a logo, confirm the title of the movie, just do something like that, update the website so there's at least like a page about the movie so that it feels real. I think it was kind of notable that one of the hosts on the podcast was like, I'm looking forward to the new series coming up, and Brian and Mike kind of is like, oh yeah, first thing, the movie. And the host was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Like, that shouldn't be the case, given how close we are, that like people don't actually know the order of the project. So will anything happen on the anniversary is the big question. I'm not super confident, but I also feel like I think that something has to kind of happen. Like this can't just be treated as just like random social media post of like, hey guys, remember Avatar exists? Fun times, 20th anniversary, like random video compilation like they always do. I feel like there has to be something here. There is a few potential things that they could do. Obviously, anything Avatar Studios would be appreciated. The Book 2 soundtrack has been coming soon for a long time. Might be a nice day to finally do the announcement for that. And then the other thing I'll throw in here is, I think also on the last podcast, we talked about potential for an Avatar Magic the Gathering set. Magic the Gathering actually has a panel at their own Magic Con, and their preview panel, where they're going to preview new products, is happening on February 21st. So I think the description for the panel says, like, okay, we're going to preview stuff from this set and this other set and potentially other surprises. The only, like, unannounced set at the moment for the year is the one that is suspected to be Avatar. So if they do announce any new product, it kind of should be Avatar, and it feels like it's certainly the day and the place to do it. That could be a big one, especially because, at least in my mind, the social media, the official social medias, post more about collaboration stuff than they do like their own stuff. Like, if they actually did do the Magic the Gathering announcement, I think they're going to make a bigger deal out of that than they did about, here's a random Instagram story announcing the City of Echoes book, that sort of thing. So I'm not incredibly confident, but I'm also kind of like, we're close enough that I just feel as a fan, it's weird that I have no expectations for this. Like, I shouldn't not have expectations for this big anniversary with the timing that's in place. But where are you at with this? Do you think they'll do anything for the giant 20th anniversary?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely get the idea, as, you know, someone who's been involved with this, that, you know, you would think that this, you know, seems like a pretty big milestone, but, you know, we've seen other milestones pass before, and, you know, we've barely got a post or, you know, someone external, not really directly related with anything on the brand, has, you know, mentioned things. So I don't know, from that perspective, I don't know, it feels like the the franchise overall is still in that like semi-dormant space where they don't really key in on those type of things as they would, when the show's really sort of like active and they're, sort of pushing the social media and all that sort of stuff. And, they always have things coming out and stuff like that. Cause, we've seen them before when, the shows are out and they're active that, they have the most, involved, sort of programs and social media programs and points reward things that, were sort of like cutting edge at the time that they were doing things. So, they definitely have the ability to do those sort of things, but it feels like there's not enough, push behind them at this current moment to really do that. So I don't know. I wonder with the movie not really, being fully sort of announced and like you're saying, like people sort of are forgetting that it's still a thing. Or, other things have sort of co-opted people's sort of interest because there's more info on that unofficially than there are on the real things. That it could easily sort of go by the wayside or just get sort of the standard sort of, side posts and things like that. I mean, it would be great if we got sort of like a mini announcement on things, like, any sort of tease would be pretty cool at this point in time. But I don't know. It feels like they need like a big sort of event type thing that's not, only solely limited to Avatar in order to really sort of push things out there.
And that is where obviously CinemaCon comes into play in terms of like, it's going to happen, but that's very industry focused, and there's going to be annoyance if like, okay, they've shown stuff off at CinemaCon, we get a description of it, but if they don't publicly post something with that, that's going to feel kind of weird. But news is news, I guess, at this point. But then the question still comes up, like, when is the first official piece of news actually going to happen? If the release date is still January 30th, is San Diego Comic-Con not a little late to do pretty much your first proper piece of marketing? At least compared to other Paramount products, movies and stuff like that, that does feel very late to me. So I just feel like something has to happen between like now and in the few weeks that follow CinemaCon. Like something publicly is going to have to happen just to, confirm the title of the movie, maybe a logo. Sure, trailer. We're going to wait until, I'm guessing, in or around Comic-Con and stuff like that. But again, the point is more that they got to start from zero, basically. Like they like on a scale from like 1 to 100, we're at like 3, maybe on the marketing scale right now. Some actors announced, title kind of. We have a copyright description of the movie, kind of. We have a rough date, but apart from a leak, no real details whatsoever. Like they have to start somewhere. It's hard to picture with the social media in the state that it's in right now, like when that's going to happen. And then is it actually going to come from the Avatar social medias, or is it just going to be like a Paramount post? It probably will be because it's a movie, which will be done differently, I think, than the series. But it's hard to say just overall what the deal is. But it's like, yeah, it's an important next, I suppose, couple of weeks, couple of months for the franchise as they, put out that first public information and confirm stuff like, hey, has the date for the movie changed? What does that do to other stuff that's happening, like, the merchandise line, other publishing stuff? Because again, there's going to be tie-in publishing stuff that they're going to keep until the very last minute to kind of announce, because they don't want like kids' novelization of the movie to be the first proper news that pops up, and that sort of thing. But yeah, we look for new information hopefully soon. Hopefully there's a need for us to come on next week and do a podcast, because we got big news for the anniversary, but I'm not holding out too much hope is the big thing. But we'll move away from news into our reviews. So we're going to go into our ATLA episode for this podcast, and that is 214, The City of Walls and Secrets, which is timed very nicely with the City of Echoes book, of course. We were talking about Ba Sing Se. Here's the episode, I guess, that's going to be most relevant to look back on, to kind of connect with whatever's going on in City of Echoes, that maybe Jin does something that creates this situation that we're in right now inadvertently, but this is a really good look into that. So yeah, this episode is super well regarded. I think the big thing with this one is that this is where it feels like the writing quality kind of really picks up this conspiracy arc. It's like the the show is doing something that's a little bit darker, a little bit more mature. It is an arc kind of based around a place once again, like we did with like the Northern Water Tribe, and we've waited so long to get here. What's Ba Sing Se like? Oh, didn't expect this dark twist on the final holdout city basically in the world. And it's super interesting, all the kind of new characters we get introduced to. Plus, we've got the multiple plot points, like Zuko and Iroh are here with the Jet plot point, and then what happens to Jet adds, I think, so much to what's going on here. That's the truly dark kind of part of the episode, is what goes down with Jet. Whereas the gang stuff is a little bit more fun, but there's still that ominous stuff in the background. Really, really strong episode, though. This really is kind of Avatar kind of hitting its stride. The setup arc for this already has been quite good since the library happened, but it really kicks into gear perfectly here. But what are your thoughts overall on City of Walls and Secrets?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I think, we've been waiting so long to get the Ba Sing Se that, finally getting there and to see our characters and their reactions to the city, I think is like one of the best parts. And they all, sort of reacted it differently. For the ones that know, what a city is like, to the ones who's never been there, the ones who've heard of it but never, been there. So there's a lot of different angles that go to being in the city, and it is pretty different than what we've seen before, because they've been to towns and they've been to other sort of smaller cities, but this is a huge city that has its own sort of history and its own sort of inner workings that's almost sort of isolated in a way from the rest of the world, or they want to be. So yeah, there's a lot that goes on in this episode, and this whole sort of part of this book.
Mm-hmm. So we'll start off, I guess, with the secondary story here, the kind of Jet Zuko stuff. I suppose we'll focus on Iroh and Zuko first. Most of this, because I'd say it's more Jet focused than Zuko and Iroh focused, which is kind of interesting. With those two, it's mainly just, hey, you've probably got Jet a little bit suspicious with the firebending. Stop that, and they make sure to be quite diligent in not firebending, even when Jet creates a situation where they maybe need to firebend. But otherwise, we see they get the jobs at the tea shop, which is perfect for Iroh. Zuko, of course, is a little bit more frustrated about the situation, but going along with things while he tries to figure out what to do next is basically the situation Zuko is in, of just a little bit maybe directionless at the moment. But Zuko gets his big moment to shine, where he steps up to defend basically his uncle from Jet, who walks in. And so we get super cool sword fight, which ends in a draw, basically. I don't think you can obviously say one is better than the other, but very, very even here. But of course, the Dai Li come in and arrest Jet. We'll talk about the Jet side of things a little bit more, but do you have any thoughts specifically on Zuko and Iroh in this episode?
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun to get to see their sort of like interactions and how they're reacting to the current situation, and Zuko sort of being, upset, and grumpy, as sort of, is per the case for his character at the current situation. I mean, he's not sort of, he's been, a little bit matured, a little bit more down to earth. He's not, saying anything, crazy to sort of out himself, and he's actually well aware that they could get outed at almost sort of any moment. So he's, pretty much on alert with most things. But Iroh's just sort of being his Iroh sort of tea-loving self, which is, sometimes could be annoying. I can definitely see, Zuko's point of view of being like, you should be more aware of your situation and maybe don't be so crazy about tea. But, other than, sort of taking care of Zuko, that is, Iroh's, main thing and stuff like that. So, I don't know. I like their interactions. I like seeing them in the tea shop and, the beginning of their whole sort of tea career, especially, knowing where that ends up and how well it ends up for them. It's nice to go back to see it from this sort of like humble origins here, and it's always cool to get to see Zuko with the swords and him actually battle here, just to get to see his skill and how he can hold his own even without the firebending.
Mm-hmm. And it is interesting because, of course, like there's the idea of like the people not know who they are, like they're celebrities basically in the world, but that's just the thing you have to accept. They ultimately seem to go with the idea Zuko probably gets a pass in the Earth Kingdom because he's been clearly scarred by a firebender. So that's a point in his favor, I guess. But otherwise, yes, this is clearly the start of like this arc, which we'll see kind of more or less resolve itself in or around like Lake Laogai and the following episode of the kind of what is it that you want? Who are you? What do you want? Is kind of the big build up to on this side of things. Where yeah, Zuko is currently directionless, just doing what he has to do to sort of like get away in a way, be protected from Azula as well. But is this what he wants? Iroh clearly can just adapt and live in this place, like making tea, even though this is a place that historically kind of has bad memories for him. He can build a life here, but does Zuko want to do that? Can he change and want that? That's the big question, and I think they do a good job with it, but this is just the start of it here. On the other side of this plot point is the Jet stuff. So Jet is, of course, here with Smellerbee and Longshot, and we straight away get the idea that they immediately sense that obsessed Jet is coming back because he can't seem to let it go that he heated his tea, they might be firebenders, and he starts to investigate them. The whole point of like he wanted to start anew in the city with his friends, and now they're just going in opposite directions. Smellerbee and Longshot want to start again, but Jet is going back to his old ways, and there's a clear sense where like they're close to him, they're gonna look out for him, but they can't really follow him down this path, and it's just an interesting kind of position for them to be put in as like the two maybe most loyal freedom fighters to Jet, but even they can't go this far with him. So what are your thoughts on the setup here? Jet's Fire Nation hatred, obsession coming back, and where that places Smellerbee and Longshot?
Yeah, it definitely puts them in an awkward position because, you know, like Smellerbee's saying, this was their whole point of getting away from things and to start over. So they're really in a hard position here where they're trying to sort of, you know, support him and help him sort of, you know, do the right thing or the change. But he's, you know, like they're saying, you know, in the episode, he's been really obsessed with this, and it's sort of like the one thing that he can't let go now that he's actually seen, you know, or thinks that he's seen, you know, this sort of action here. And, you know, at least he does have the idea that he's going to report it to the authorities, right? But then he goes ahead and sort of jumps into the fray here to try to out Zuko, and, you know, that doesn't end up working out for him, right? So it's unfortunate situation here with this sort of character who, you know, definitely, you know, needs some help, but where can he get it from, and can he get the right help before things are too late?
And I think that the presentation of Jet in this episode is very interesting because they're playing this fine line of like, Jet's correct, like he should be pointing out that there's secret firebenders in the behind the walls, basically, because that's what the city is trying to do. It's the last holdout against the Fire Nation. He doesn't know that right now Zuko and Iroh are not like plotting anything, so he's correct to be suspicious of them and like want to report them. But then there is also the side of the episode that's like, you're way too obsessed, Jet. You should maybe not be focusing in on this. Just, you know, you've not really seen them do anything wrong. Don't do anything with this. So Jet's put in a kind of very complicated kind of situation here. And like from his point of view, it's like, why aren't my friends supporting me? Like, can they not see that there are firebenders here? But they, you know, the threat maybe isn't obviously there. It's an interesting one. So when he does get carted away kind of screaming about it, he comes across as crazy, but then you also have the other angle on it of like, oh no, they're missing the point here, that he was actually telling the truth. But then because of the conspiracy, it's kind of like, how do they deal with like actual threats and assessing what's people just going crazy about the war versus, no, actually there is a proper plot going on here. It's an interesting one from that point of view. But what are your thoughts on that? The kind of like pros and cons of Jet here, where he's clearly being presented as being obsessed with revenge, but then he's kind of right in terms of protecting Ba Sing Se, protecting the war type situation.
Yeah, he definitely has an idea behind it being sort of like the right thing to do, but is he going about it the right way? Is there even a right way to go about it in this sort of city, especially with how, you know, corrupt it actually is? Not that he would necessarily know that because he's new there just like they are. So they, you know, I doubt they have a full scope of, you know, the city and how you're not supposed to say things. And No, it seems like in the lower sections of the city, they let maybe some things slide unless they're really sort of outlandish, which in this case, Jet is being very sort of out there with it. So, there's some tact that you could have potentially had, which I guess, hasn't necessarily been Jet's, character's sort of forte. He's, more just go, directly at whatever the problem is. So yeah, it definitely, feels like there's definitely, some reason behind what he's saying, but it's just not the right way to go about it.
And yeah, then the end with Jet here is him, of course, being dragged away from the fight with Zuko by the Dai Li. He is viewed as being the crazy person in all of this. And there's definitely an element of, okay, he's taken away because he was being sort of disorderly with people in a tea shop, but also like the conspiracy of just don't talk about the Fire Nation, don't talk about the war is also a factor. And the fact that they immediately moved to brainwash him kind of highlights that. That's probably more of the reason they took him away. If it was just a brawl, not about Fire Nation related stuff, would they have stepped in? I'm not overly sure. But this is the big kind of shocking moment at the end of the episode is the Dai Li clearly, we don't even know for sure what's going on, but clearly brainwashing him in some way. And it's the dialogue I think is really strong here because it's Jet being really like logical. Like they're saying like there's no war in Ba Sing Se, and he's like, what are you talking about? Like where do you think all the refugees come from that keep coming into this city? You can't hide it. And when we see him again, of course, it's going to be this big shock when Jet's kind of reintroduced to society. But just that brainwashing is a thing that exists in Avatar is kind of crazy. We know a little bit more about it now from the Yang Chen novels, the whole like light oscillation kind of stuff they kind of alluded to there, that it has a historical setup from before this. But still, it's like, oh, didn't expect this in Avatar. And this is clearly how they deal with putting down a lot of other stuff going on, which makes me wonder, like, might the brainwashing angle be something that the Jin novel maybe focuses on a little bit? But what are your thoughts on the reveal of Dai Li brainwash?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely, at the time, it definitely was very sort of shocking and not something you would expect. But even now, it definitely feels like that's a pretty, deep, dark thing to do. And especially since it's being done at such a high level within the government organization, which, alludes to a whole bunch of different things. It definitely speaks to a lot of different things. And yeah, it definitely feels like, if it was just a brawl, maybe the guards there, or the police officers there would have just handled it, and the Dai Li wouldn't have needed to step in to take this such sort of lengths there. But, upsetting the peace and the unity of the city, which is their whole thing, definitely puts you on a different level. And yeah, even though, I'm sure they don't brainwash everyone in the city because, that seems, quite unreasonable and unfeasible to do. Definitely the ones that sort of stand out, probably get the attention and get that sort of a treatment, which is crazy to think about.
So this moves us over to the other side of the episode, which is mainly the gang being introduced to Ba Sing Se. So I like the way they do this, where we do just get a full-on like kind of train ride, like through the entire city, basically, where we do get to see the different areas that I almost forget sometimes that, oh yeah, there is that extra wall and there's an entire like the agrarian zone. I almost forget that exists, that, even if the drill were to break through, they've got a whole like fields of stuff like that to get through before they get to pretty much that many people at all. How defensible like the actual inner section of Ba Sing Se actually is. But yeah, we go to that. We highlight the lower level, the upper ring, kind of middle ring type stuff. And yeah, that the big thing with Ba Sing Se is that the people are grouped basically based on kind of class status. You want to get into one of the higher rings to prove that you're doing well. And there's a clear sense that I guess things are controlled depending on how further up you are. That, I guess they maybe don't mind that much people knowing about the war in the lower ring because it's not the most important. And it gets more maybe controlled as you go up. This is another thing the Jin novel can maybe focus on a little bit more, the details of how enforced things are in each ring. But definitely it's a bit of an awakening moment for a lot of the characters here, where like Aang reveals it is his first time here, but he was always like told that this is what the city is kind of like, basically. Not that there's a conspiracy here, but that the ring system has always been the way Ba Sing Se functions, and that's very different from air nomad culture. Toph is the one who knows exactly what's going on here because she's used to Earth Kingdom kind of nobility, high society. And of course, a city this big is shocking for Katara and Sokka. So it's a cool way to introduce the audience as well as the gang to the city. And even though like it's a pretty nice one episode introduction, that novel has depth that they can go into it on a lot of ways, I think. Even though we've been to Ba Sing Se a bunch of times in the different sections, a full novel set in Ba Sing Se is going to add a lot. But what are your thoughts on how this episode introduces us to Ba Sing Se?
Yeah, I think it does a great job of that. Like you're saying, that the idea of them traveling through each of the different sections, first on train, then on cart. I think it does a great way of illustrating, the different levels of the city, how people are living their life, how, some of it can be quaint / dangerous depending on where you're at, and otherwise, it has different sort of aspects that you have to keep in mind. So yeah, I thought that was a really good job, just of, like you're saying, them explaining it to us, explaining to the characters how, Sokka, thinks, oh no, it can't be that big, but Sokka doesn't really have, the sense of scale of what the city is. Like, even though, they saw the wall from the outside and they saw that as huge, that doesn't give you a good scope of the, the actual like circumference of the actual city and how there's different sections and stuff like that. And, it makes sense that they wouldn't be aware of it. How would they, considering their sort of background and them simple country folk, as Toph says. So yeah, I think it's definitely a good way to explain it to us as well and get to see the whole scope of things.
Mm-hmm. And then we're basically introduced to the idea that the group is now being handled by Ju Di. So she immediately meets them and she explains the basics of the city to them, but this is where we started to get into the idea that they're not just in the city allowed to be free. They're going to be given this kind of house to stay in while they're here in the upper ring, which is really cool because he's Aang's the Avatar. But that seems to be there mainly just so that they can keep a close eye on them more than anything. They're really not given that much freedom. Ju Di goes with them wherever they go. And as we begin to investigate stuff like, hey, anyone know where Appa is? She's there in the background just like basically gesturing to the person they're speaking to, just like, don't say anymore. Nope, you've said enough. No need to go any more into that. And there's just a clear sense where everyone knows not to speak about certain things, not to raise a fuss about basically anything. And yeah, you can sort of see the control here. The Dai Li get introduced kind of like as like this shadowy figures in the background. The tone that gets kind of the atmosphere of the city that gets presented here is pretty nicely done overall. And you can see the frustration growing, and it kind of builds up to the moment where Ju Di leaves, they go over to speak to their kind of neighbor, Pong, and they get a little bit out of him, but he's still terrified to say anything. He just says, don't mention the war. So the full truth about the whole war thing, they just get a sense where people don't talk about it for whatever reason, and to stay away from the Dai Li. So lots of warnings and weird interactions, but they don't really know exactly what's going on. So what are your thoughts on this stuff? Ju Di being introduced, and then a lot of the weird interactions with the citizens of Ba Sing Se.
Yeah, I always thought Ju Di, was an interesting aspect of this, and to show how much, freedom they really had when they were out on their own and doing things, and, what Toph sort of like left behind. We saw, a little bit of Toph being sort of like handled and watched and stuff like this, but this is like the full-on treatment of it in the city here, and especially Sokka and Katara, they're not used to this sort of thing. They're used to being the ones that do everything, can go on their own and do whatever. But now they're seeing that life can be quite different than what they're sort of used to here. So yeah, the frustration definitely sort of builds throughout the whole thing, and I think it's funny when we get to see it as a really sort of peak later on in another episode. But even in this one, where they eventually have to sort of like break out and try to do their own thing to sort of try and see the king, you can definitely feel the sort of levels of frustration build and build and build.
Mm-hmm. From here, we get introduced to the one way they might get to see the king earlier before having to potentially wait 6 to 8 weeks. And I believe that's just 6 to 8 weeks before their petition is like heard. Not that it will be confirmed as well. So they decide that, we need to go to this party that the king is having for his pet bear, Bosco. And finally, the series addresses the whole kind of unique animal aspect here with the introduction of the just bear, Bosco, and we have a whole like 10-second joke that's not quite a joke about how, it must be this type of bear or that type of bear, and it's like, no, just bear. And they're all like, weird. So there are a few non-hybrid animals in Avatar, of course, but I like the joke here with this, that Bosco is just a normal bear, and that makes him one of the rarest animals, I guess, in the world. So fun stuff there, but the idea is, of course, okay, we have to sneak into a party. Aang's not been invited. Toph highlights that that's not going to work because none of the others know high society. She does, and she feels, okay, Katara, you'll get by. We can work with you. The other two, not so much. And they basically set it up right now. Like, Toph and Katara will try and get into the party, and Aang and Sokka will try and get in as like serving staff, basically, which is effectively what happens. But fun stuff. I do like that this episode particularly highlights that, the different background that Toph comes from allows her to have a bit of speciality here, knowing what Ba Sing Se will kind of be like, which is nice. But what are your thoughts on the setup here ahead of the big party?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's just another idea of their sort of not being sort of exposed to this type of culture and this type of, society here, because, they're definitely, they're from the outskirts of things and they don't have to interact with people in this sort of way, right? So it's not something that they would be familiar with in any sort of way. So I like that Toph has this sort of ability to sort of just like flip the switch and sort of become, a person who is sort of, or should be revered in this sort of society here. We'll see how far it actually gets her or gets them in this sort of case here, but it definitely, it adds something to the group here that they didn't have before, because even though Aang's, been around and has done a lot of traveling even before he was with the group, this is the sort of thing that he would definitely sort of try to avoid or just wouldn't want to be involved with on a normal sort of basis here, or at least not at, this level of his avatar sort of, training and stuff like that. Like later on, of course, it's a whole different story when you have to interact with, the upper, leaders of the world. But right now, that's not something that he's been exposed to yet.
Mm-hmm. So, the plan then gets executed. Toph and Katara try to get in. Toph tries to use the the Beifong kind of passport, but they don't accept that because, of course, it's the Earth King. Katara then decides, hey, someone important's just arrived. Let's try and get him to go in. Like, we'll act like, we got like locked outside, basically. And so it's Long Feng, and he accepts this, and it's just like, yes, I'll escort you two ladies in, and we'll find your parents on the inside. And so they do manage to get in. Outside, Sokka and Aang do end up getting in. Just like, we don't even need to focus on this too much. Yeah, they'll just dress up as busboys and head in. Everyone meets up on the inside. Basically, right as the kind of king comes out, there was some cutaways to Bosco and the idea of people want to sit next to him because he's so notable. But the big stuff happens when Judy finds everyone and is freaking out because they've gone against her orders, basically. This causes Aang to kind of reveal himself, and I like the tone change here the second like Aang is revealed as the Avatar in the party, because all the nobles want to meet the Avatar, of course, but Judy and the high-ups in the city don't want the Avatar to publicly interact with the high-up people. They don't want the king to kind of know the Avatar is here, basically. And so this is where you see the Dai Li come in. The king gets taken away again, and you see how silently, effortlessly, all this stuff starts happening in the background, and the entire team gets quickly taken down. And Long Feng then kind of confronts them in the library, and the big truth gets revealed here. I really like the kind of tone shift in the party from like fun times with Aang at the party to, oh, look at what Long Feng can effortlessly execute with the Dai Li. But what are your thoughts on the party sequence here?
Yeah, I think the party sequences, that's the highlight of this whole episode here, I think, because, this was their goal to get to see the king so they could tell him about the war that up until this point, seems to get sort of brushed aside. And, they don't really have the scope of how much, the city is being hidden from, what's currently going on the outside. So they're still of the mindset that, something can be done. Like they still have that hope with things, but this is where it really comes to pass that this is a lot bigger than they thought they were going to be involved with. And the fact that they're like you're saying, they effortlessly sort of get taken away, which is sort of what the Dai Li is known for. We don't know that really until now, but they pretty quickly disable our heroes here, who up until this point have seemed like really strong, like they've been able to combat like many armies up until this point. But here within the shadows, they have no real recourse for the current sort of actions here. So yeah, it definitely is a large sort of tone shift here where things seem fun, like they're getting to this party, people are eating and enjoying themselves, to, oh no, this is really sort of a dangerous situation that we weren't really prepared for at all.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, the big scene with Long Feng, very, very important here. He's a very good talker, but he's pretty upfront with them here of just like, I'm not really going to try and lie too much to you here. He just full on, without maybe super bluntly saying it, is just kind of like, yeah, the Earth King only really gets himself involved in stuff that relates to like the cultural heritage of Ba Sing Se. I tend to do everything else. And they do figure out that like, oh, that means the king is just a puppet. Like, you basically decide on everything to do. Long Feng argues that no, His Majesty is an icon, a god to his people, but he can't sully his hands with the hourly change of an endless war. They tried to bring up, hey, solar eclipse. The Earth Kingdom basically is leading the defense against the Fire Nation. Should we not work together to do something about this? But he just doesn't want to hear anything about this. That he's fine keeping up just this idea that, Ba Sing Se should be a utopia, that they have to keep knowledge of the war outside, really pinned down. Like, it shouldn't really be talked about within the walls or anything like that, because this is the last kind of safe city on Earth. We can't, throw the citizens into a state of panic, which obviously seems crazy because, like, you're at the same time defending the war but trying to keep it from everyone within the walls. It's like a situation. He talks about how, like, if we just told everyone about the war and let it be openly talked about, the economy would be ruined. They'd lose their way of life, their traditions, which is an important part of Ba Sing Se, I guess, that they want to keep the cultural heritage there. Like, that's why the Dai Li were introduced. So they're really trying to keep this all in place, and I guess they feel the war would change a lot of that stuff. But yes, the word utopia does get kind of uttered here, and this is intercut with Jet being brainwashed. That, like, Long Feng saying all the kind of nice things, but actually, if you do go against them, they'll force you to think otherwise, which is a very dark thing to consider. The team is planning to basically just let everyone know what the situation is, and then we get the real threat here, which is just like, hey, you wouldn't want anything to happen to your bison. You're here looking for him, right? And the threat, it's not presented super kind of bluntly, but everyone knows what is meant by that. That Long Feng knows this, knows about Appa, and likely is holding him somewhere to keep the Avatar in check. So this is why they're not really able to do anything immediately. And Long Feng, just by being sort of clever and in power, has, neutralized Team Avatar without really lifting a finger, which is quite incredible. But what are your thoughts on this big Long Feng reveal about, like, the truth of Ba Sing Se?
Yeah, I definitely, shows a lot about his character without actually getting to see him do, sort of anything directly. Just the fact that he knows all of this stuff about sort of our group here, which, you can tell even from just when they were sort of introduced to Jodie that, stuff was going on, that he has, least he thinks he has a pretty good control of the situation. The fact that they're able to sort of, fight the war while keeping it sort of like under wraps, especially from, I guess we're, assuming at this point from the king as well here. So it's definitely, shows the power that he has over the situation, which I think, the group, comes to a pretty quick sort of understanding of what's going on. Like they understand the idea of a sort of puppet king and sort of what he has hold over them in terms of, they want to find Appa. That was their whole sort of reason for getting here, right? In addition to, hopefully doing something about the war, but definitely feels like at this point they're, being spoken down to. They don't really see, Longfei doesn't really see the value in what they sort of know, even though, to them it seems pretty sort of clear what they can sort of bring to the table. And, is that just because they're kids, or is that just because of, the situation that they want to control in their, what they think is their perfect utopia city? We're still trying to figure out and decide at this point here, but it's definitely, very intriguing to see sort of how the cities run from, behind the shadows here, which I don't think is something you would have particularly thought of, coming to Ba Sing Se in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, big reveals at the end. And then I suppose the one thing I didn't mention is the Judy reveal as well, right at the end, as like the other layer of the brainwashing thing is kind of just as creepy, because Judy already has felt like a little bit like, okay, it's kind of weird just the job you have and the way you're going about this, but then to be like, Judy will take you back to your home and it's a different woman, but who's speaking in basically exactly the same way, as if they treat her as if she is the same person from before, and all the questions come up of like, wait, what happened to the original Judy, who obviously wasn't able to contain them from causing a bit of chaos at the party? So has she been punished? Like, what's going to happen to her? And then why did they have another one to do the same thing? And so before you even get the reveal that there are like hundreds of these Judys, you kind of get the sense that, oh, this is how they kind of handle, I guess, people in the higher rings of the city, is that they give them one of these people to handle them, and they're all trained in the exact same way. And so brainwashing is not just to change the minds of the kind of people with rebellious thoughts, it's also like we construct people basically to stop this stuff from happening as well, which is just as creepy as well. But any thoughts on the initial Judy production line stuff that we get here?
Yeah, and we don't even really know the full scope of it here, but just that one little bit there at the end is like creepy enough to set up like all the sort of red flags, and the group, they call it out immediately. Like, you don't even look the same as the previous, person that we were dealing with. But I think, by the end of the episode, you can see the sort of cracks form in the original Judy, that, things weren't going the way that she sort of was instructed to be with the group here. So, you get to see sort of the ramifications of her sort of failing in her sort of endeavors earlier on. So yeah, it definitely is something to take note of, that, this sort of situation is more than just sort of the dissidents.
Mm-hmm. I'm guessing we'll probably see a Judy in the novel as well at some point.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a fun one, how they distinguish between that and stuff like that. Like, who knows, maybe Susu's being like maybe on the pathway to become a Judy or something like that. We don't know. But yeah, that is City of Walls and Secrets. Really good start to the proper kind of Ba Sing Se arc here. But we'll move over to our Korra episode, which is actually the start of a new book. We're going into book 3 Change here with a breath of fresh air. I suppose just before we are starting a book, we'll have some quick thoughts maybe overall on the book. I like book 3. I like all the books. I do think overall my preference is that I preferred the first 2 books of Korra over the second 2 books of Korra, just because I think they come together a little bit more solidly. Whereas, at least to me, book 3 and 4, that there's a few more things that I think could have been fleshed out a bit more. Mainly when it comes to, I think, the villains. I'm not as strong in the Red Lotus, even though I think it's an amazing concept. I don't think the development quite is where it needs to be, but I think a lot of the side plot stuff that goes on in this book, like Return of Airbenders, kind of that whole plot with kind of Korra and Tenzin, and then the kind of Beifong family stuff that gets introduced, that's all like really, really fantastic. And so this book, I think, is quite interesting in just that sense of, a lot of the books, I think it's all about the main plot, and maybe the secondary plots don't matter as much, but this one, it's more the kind of other way around. So I really like this. I think I've moved it up a little bit from kind of previous rankings of the seasons, where I probably placed this as like my third favorite book, and more book 4, I think, is maybe on the weaker end of things. But yeah, still some fantastic stuff in this book, and I think this is a very good episode opener. Helped, of course, by how crazy the things are that happen at the end of book 2, but it's a really good start to the setup for a lot of things for the book. But overall, what are your thoughts heading into book 3 of Korra here, and your overall thoughts on this opening episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, I really do enjoy this sort of book. I think, sometimes maybe in the fandom it gets more hyped just because of the villains and how their sort of situation in the show itself, which I think, they are cool. Like, they are really awesome. And I think that definitely gives this season a lot of good sort of like action bits that, maybe weren't sort of as focused on in the other ones, depending on, what you're sort of thinking in terms of action. And I think there are very sort of like unique elements that make this book sort of stand out. And I think, the fact that we're getting, sort of by the end of this one, we'll see what happens with the Air Nation and new airbenders and stuff like that. I think that adds to making this sort of stand out, because that feels like something that we've been, that we've obviously been missing. So the fact that we're getting introduced to that element again here in a unique way, I think is, really cool, and it makes it sort of stand out. So it definitely is, one of my favorite books. I mean, I like all the books, so it's hard for me to sort of pick which one's out compared to the others. Different ones have different aspects that I like, but I think this one is a really good one. I definitely agree with the idea that there are a lot of sort of side things that come into play here that, add to the world that we wouldn't necessarily think of. I think, like you're saying, some of those could be expanded upon and would be cool to have more on them, which I think is, something that we've always said about this book in general, that, there's good starts for things, but they don't, give us enough of them. But, again, there's only so much you can do with so many episodes. But no, I really enjoy this one, and I think it's a good start of explaining how the changes of the last sort of book sort of are being dealt with. I think it's a good reactionary season compared to the last one.
And it is interesting because I do think some people like criticize maybe Korra for like the opening 2 books, their transitions into the later 2 books are kind of weak, but I think 2 into 3 is like maybe the best done transition overall. Like, it's very clear that like there's actually a ton of setup between book 2 and book 3. Whereas I'd honestly say like the other transitions are probably weaker. Like, I think like 3 into 4 and how they actually overall execute the time skip is maybe not as good as this. The book 1 into 2 one, I think maybe gets over criticized just because like it's not an immediate follow up. Like, it's a little random, but like I don't see it as like a problem with the way it really did things. Whereas this one just kind of feels pretty nice overall, but it also benefits from only being like a few weeks later as well. Like, it is an immediate follow-up, and it kind of has to be as well. But let's get into things here. So straight away, the big reveal right from the opening scene, and I like how they do it here. We start with a Bumi scene, not with any of the main characters. We go straight to Bumi playing with the spirit Boomju, who's his friend. And he kind of falls off a cliff. You think he's going to get badly injured, but actually he saves himself with airbending. And of course, we knew Bumi is a non-bender, so here's a massive reveal that Bumi is in fact an airbender. I almost wish this had been followed up by the Mako scene at the police station. So they had that kind of back-to-back of like Bumi's an airbender, and then Mako randomly finds out about another airbender. But the way it flows in the episode, I think, still works. But we'll just cover this idea that like this is one of the big changes that they're going for here. Yes, spirits are back in the world. Yes, the city has spirit wilds, vines all over the place. But there are new airbenders now, whereas previously, just based on like the family situations, Tenzin's family should be the only airbenders in the world in addition to Korra. Now there are other airbenders out there as well, and this episode kind of does a good job at that. With we actually get introduced to 3 of the new airbenders. One random person, one is one of the villains, of course, and then one is one of the characters kind of connected to our main group, part of actually the Airbender family, conveniently. So I really like how they do the core airbending reveal kind of across the whole episode. And even when like Tenzin and Korra come into play, I like that this is the driving force of this episode, that Korra's not sure what to do. She eventually gets banished basically from the city and decides that actually this is fine. I want to find the other airbenders. I think this is actually something I can focus on, whereas book 1 and 2 kind of has been about Korra not knowing what to do and just kind of reacting. Now she's deciding to do something here because she's kind of facilitated this change in the world. So it's a good way to start the book overall, and it's a really fascinating thing to kind of, they kind of had to do this eventually, I think, of just to accelerate airbenders coming back into the world. And I like that they used like harmonic convergence to do that. But what are your thoughts on this is what A Breath of Fresh Air is about? It's new airbenders entering the world randomly here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the idea of bringing airbenders back has like its appeal, right? Like, they were wiped out before, so the fact that there's some way that we can get them to come back and, to make it seem, plausibly real. Like there was a life-changing, a world-changing event that previously happened involving the Avatar, of course, that would sort of like, tip the scales. And, they talk throughout the whole book about sort of the balance and what the Avatar means to the world and sort of what role they can potentially play. So I think it's a good way of getting that sort of in the forefront, and it's also well as just giving Korra a direct role to do. I mean, I guess you could say she still is technically reacting to something, but it's something that she created. So she's following the path that she started on in terms of what she wants to do throughout this whole season, this whole book. So I like that sort of aspect here. And to start it off with Bumi sort of being this sort of typical sort of shenanigans, but to actually get to see it actually have sort of a meaning and to see how it plays out throughout the whole episode, I think is a really cool way to begin things with the sort of like least likely sort of character that you would think would have such a role, I think.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I like as we kind of continue on, like it takes a while for him to convince everyone that he is an airbender because they think it's just one of his kind of tall tales. But then eventually Milo just chucks a plate at him and he inadvertently activates it. And it's just this like, they're eating, so like food drops out of everyone's mouth as like it is actually the truth at the dinner table. Which it's just a fantastic reveal here because for Tenzin, like this is a kind of mind-blowing moment, like another airbender, and it's his brother who's one of the new airbenders, but it doesn't immediately maybe have the appeal of like, he doesn't immediately think this means that airbenders are popping up anywhere, because I think Ikki says like maybe he's just a late bloomer, which is certainly a possibility, but then the Mako reveal from like in a few scenes time changes things, and I like that we start to build the setup for when's Tenzin going to have like the emotional reaction to this, and we get that later on in the episode. We'll talk about that. But the next thing I suppose to really talk about is probably the effect of Raiko on the episode. He is exceptionally dislikable in this one. Like he just I remember being sort of criticized while the show was still airing for maybe being critical of him in book 2. People were like, no, you've got this all wrong. I think I was correct once book 3 came around, and then especially once the comic came around. He's just all about the media. Like, sure, you could say Korra's argumentative with him as well, but like he kind of starts a lot of this stuff and he's not doing anything. I think the fact that he's in any way blaming Korra for this situation, when if he had helped Korra in like Night of a Thousand Stars when she asked him for help, things might not have got to this stage because they might have had an army to help them attack Unalaq and his forces. That might have prevented the whole, oh yeah, we got captured almost immediately situation. And we might have had more time to defeat Vaatu and Unalaq before any of the crazy stuff actually happened. So Raiko really manages to put the blame on Korra, even though like Korra basically did the impossible last book. And the fact that people are complaining that like, could you not have done it in a slightly different way? And the answer is obviously like, no. So Korra's put in an awful position here where she's saved the world against all the odds, but she's being blamed that some damage happened basically, and Raiko's not really doing anything to fix it. He's not coming up with any ideas. He just wants to make sure his approval rating is above Korra's, but both of their ratings are low. What are your thoughts on Raiko as we go into book 3?
Yeah. I don't know about that. I mean, I think, he always felt like sort of like a politician. And I guess, in the beginning, it seemed like an okay thing because, the city didn't really have, decent-ish leadership, and they were sort of corruptish in the way that they were run, or, just one had, too much sway over the others. So, like, I can see how, initially they thought, Raiko was going to sort of be the dude and, was a good sort of leader of the people and stuff like that. But, unfortunately, politics sort of mixes up everything. So, the show, has a good job of reflecting that here. And we definitely can see that in this book. He definitely has that sort of, grimy sort of feel to him where, he's, not being like the worst ever, but, he's not necessarily doing anything to sort of help the situation here. And before he actively went against the situation, even if, his idea, you could see some reason for like, okay, yeah, I want to protect the city versus the other people, but they're all sort of interconnected, but it's a hard thing to sort of see there. But yeah, it definitely, feels in this episode and throughout that, he's definitely not the guy for doing things with them. If Korra would have just like left things alone or something like that, like how worse off would the city have been? There could have been a lot, worser things that could have happened potentially. So, it's hard for him to see that. And, unfortunately, Korra is just sort of gets the burnt end of everything here with her approval ratings, which is sort of funny to see that, an Avatar is sort of thinking about this sort of things, but this is sort of like the current view of things, right? And this is sort of how their perception of things are. And Korra, she cares about helping people. Like that's been her whole thing. Like she wants to be that Avatar. She wants to be involved with things. Like we get to see her do that a couple times in an episode where she wants to help, but she gets sort of pushed aside either because she doesn't think she can help or because other people have it sort of under control or think they have it under control here. So it definitely is a hard situation here to be in. And yeah, I think, Raiko just definitely comes off like unlikable to the extreme in this whole episode.
Yeah, and that's another challenge for Korra, having to face kind of, I suppose, modern media for as the first Avatar. I guess Aang would have maybe dealt with it later on a little bit, but like it probably has evolved even going into kind of Korra's era here, especially as like a younger Avatar who's not like a veteran, kind of knowing what to do. Very, very challenging being like, announced in front of the world in like the way that she was in book 1, that sort of idea, being expected to give speeches that will kind of be recorded for all time rather than just like it'll be written about in a book somewhere. It's like, no, you can go back and like listen to these basically. It's interesting. But yeah, the big thing with Raiko by the end of this is that he basically blames Korra for just causing constant issues in the city and then effectively banishes her from the city. So that's kind of an interesting point. And they do try and sort of set the stage here, and this is maybe getting into the overall main plot of the book, is that like obviously Zahir's going to get introduced. He's going to be anti-world leader. Her interactions with Raiko here, I guess, are meant to highlight that maybe Korra should be anti-world leaders as well because she has issues with Raiko, but she doesn't hate him so bad that she wants to kill him like Zahir and Co do. They never, I feel like, quite touch on that overall as like a plot point, but it's sort of set up here about like, hey, you have reasons to dislike world leaders, why don't you do something about it? But yeah, pretty crazy thing, Raiko banishing Korra in front of everyone, even though she's just kind of like saved everyone from before. But I guess they also do sort of bring up the idea that like you keeping the spirit portals open has created other problems, like the spirits. Not everyone likes that the spirits are here, that sort of idea. Doesn't really get touched on that much. You kind of have to wait until the comics for the most part to really get into the spirit kind of aspect. We're kind of still waiting for a little bit of that to a certain degree, but at least it does get touched upon here, the idea of spirits are just living in the middle of roads because the spirit vines come through there, and you can't actually get rid of the spirit vines because one of the spirits basically says that like the vines basically are spirits, which is why Korra comes up with the idea to spirit bend them, which doesn't actually work, which I think is an interesting one. that they are basically permanent. I'd like to know more about why that kind of is the case, because it does mean that the second Unavatu did this, there was no stopping it. He just permanently made this a spirit vine section of the city. But what are your thoughts on that? The spirit aspect of kind of the decisions that Korra has made. The fact that, yes, Boomju is here. Jinora, of course, is quite positive about the spirits. But otherwise, it seems like most other people view it as a nuisance that has happened here. But at the same time, there is the acceptance that Korra can't actually, no one can get rid of the spirit vines. They're just part of the city now.
Yeah, they've fully integrated with at least, part of the city here, which, I definitely can see, like, it's an interesting sort of like comparison, right? Because this is like the city, the current city of the future, right? Like this is where like all the high tech stuff is happening. And these are the most sort of modern people, at least as far as, we know more or less in the world. So, that sort of idea that, has sort of been like reverted to a sense, has an interesting sort of comparison and look to it, which I think is sort of like the whole point that they were going for here, right? So I think it's an interesting aspect that, most of the city, at least as of now, isn't really about it. And yeah, there definitely is a lot that they could sort of explore with that. And you're right, we do get to see a lot more of that in the comics here. But even a little bit here, we get to see there are parts, where people were trying to live in the buildings that had the spirit vines, and Korra does, like you're saying, she tries to spirit bend them away, but then that actually sort of brings them back in force here. So I guess they're not like a negative thing since they can't be removed, but they're I don't know, they're like benign almost, but they still have an effect on the city here, and you definitely can make them worse, it seems. So something to consider here. And it's just that this was the way that Korra thought that was the right answer to reacting with them and leaving them in the world here and in the city here. So it's interesting to see that this is something that they're going to have to adapt to and sort of live with, which is sort of what Korra gets to by the end of the episode, but she has to sort of build up to this sort of idea and this sort of thinking here, whereas some characters, like you're saying, Jinora, we're all about this sort of situation here, but they come from an idea that is already sort of integrated with the spirits. And the air nomads, of course, are the perfect ones to sort of deal with that. So they have the lead in on that aspect, but everyone else has to catch up to that.
Next, I suppose, what will we cover? I guess Daw does get introduced here, so he is our kind of first random new airbender here. This is the person Mako gets a report about. He goes to investigate it. He initially doesn't believe Daw's brother, who says that his brother was airbending, but he does quickly get hit by a door sent flying at him by airbending. And Daw's just kind of panicked by this sudden reveal that he has airbending, and especially with him, it seems like the effect that it's having is that he just, anytime he moves, he almost lets out airbending. He really can't control it, so he thinks he's a danger to others and sort of goes on the run. Leading to basically the final scene where Daw's on top of Kyoshi Bridge, and Korra has to come up and use a lot of the development from the episode to help him out here. He does fall, she saves him, she introduces him to Tenzin, and he becomes the first kind of recruit into kind of like the new Air Nation as we get here. And he does continue throughout the rest of the book. He's kind of notable as like that first like extra airbender, which is kind of cool, that we did focus on there. Not maybe the most amazing character overall, but they give him enough, I think, over the course of the book to make him sort of stand out, especially when we get to like original airbenders later on. But what are your thoughts on Daw as the sort of like random airbender character?
Yeah, I think it's a good way to show someone's reaction to getting like a new ability that you otherwise wouldn't have in any sort of way here. So not everyone would have sort of a background in knowing, airbending and how to react to having it. And, especially if you don't have any control over it, like Boomy was having the issue where he couldn't figure out how to use it, right? But Daw is the exact opposite, like you're saying, where anything that he does seems to like sort of just shoot an extra blast of air out, and he's just sort of overpowered in sort of what he's able to do with his ability. So it definitely, is a good precursor to showing you how, people are going to have very different responses to getting this new ability here. And some are going to enjoy it and sort of take advantage of it, while others are sort of going to want it to sort of go away here. So, the fact that he has to sort of be talked down literally by Korra, is a nice way of just sort of giving us a good grasp of the range of, I guess sort of reactions people are going to have to this. And, we'll see as we go out throughout the whole book how people are, both positive and negative towards this new sort of ability that they find themselves with.
Yeah, and they come back around to, like, they use this episode to really use the theme of change quite a lot. We'll discuss the Tenzin Korra scenes and stuff like that, but she helps Daw deal with, like, changes that have happened to him, and that they'll support him with that. Korra has people around her that will support her. But, like, for instance, I suppose the opposite of that is, like, Raiko just doesn't deal with the change, like, at all well, and just kind of overreacts to everything. But we'll get into, I guess, some of the character dynamic stuff here. So probably the main thing in terms of the main cast here is that Mako is a little bit awkward, or very awkward, around Asami and Korra. In addition to the fact that Asami and Korra have now become kind of closer than they were in the first two books, where they really didn't have that many scenes together, but now they're among the closest kind of members of the group overall, where Mako, he now stays at the police station. They've not seen too much of him. And then we see very clearly when he does show up, he's quite, like, stiff around both Korra and Asami. We address the potential drama that could have come up with this in the driving scene with Korra and Asami, where they kind of admit the truth to each other about some of the relationship drama stuff from before. They seem quite chill and relaxed about it, even though it was quite dramatic. And they just run with the idea that Mako will get over it eventually, but we're okay with that. So it is the writers, like, putting all the drama on Mako, and it does affect Mako as a character for, like, pretty much, like, the rest of the series going into, like, turf wars until they finally get Mako past this. So it takes a really long time for Mako to be, like, properly comfortable as part of the group again after this. Not my favorite kind of writing decision from the series overall here. It allows for some good things in that, like, say, the Korra Asami dynamic starts here, which is good, but it does feel it's a little bit at Mako's expense, like, quite heavily as a character. He does get moments, but it does feel like there's a big contrast between interpersonal stuff with Mako and just Mako as a combatant kind of type thing. It's not, like, awful here. It's more just, like, in the same way the writers wanted to get kind of Korra and Asami past the drama, I do feel they should have just done the same thing with Mako. Like, you could have just made the decision to just have all the characters be mature about it, move past it, because that seems to be the whole approach of, like, on the relationship side of things as well with the second half of Korra, is they're having a breath of fresh air and getting away from the really intense dramatic relationships and having things be a little bit more like, yeah, this is normal and nice, like, Opal and Bolin, rather than Bolin and Eska, how crazy that was, that sort of idea. But what are your thoughts on the kind of dynamic between most of the main cast as presented at the start of this season?
Yeah, I think, it definitely feels like the girls get through it, rather quickly, and Mako's definitely, has a slow lead into things. And eventually he does get it sort of resolved, but it definitely, they play it up here a lot, I think, sometimes, of him sort of being awkward around them, which, isn't sort of, like, unusual for a guy to be or anything like that. So, some of that is sort of based on how, it might potentially work out, but it feels, maybe a little bit counter, like you're saying, considering things are supposed to be working on the up and up in terms of how things are going with, after, sort of the craziness of the last sort of book and season stuff. So it does feel a little bit sad that it's like that. But I like that eventually they do sort of get to at least a slightly better point by the end of the episode, where they're at least able to have, like, slightly sort of normal conversations. Like, Mako's still sort of a bit odd on things, but, he's sort of an odd character in general. So some of it I can sort of see being there sort of regardless of the situation. But, it does feel like it does take a bit longer to get there, but otherwise, I think it's cool that Korra and Asami are able to sort of like joke about the whole situation and come to sort of like a good understanding with it.
Hmm. And so yeah, this is sort of the very, very beginning of like what will eventually lead to Korrasami. I don't think like anything here feels like inherently like romantic just yet, but I think that's purposeful because the two don't really have that many scenes together prior to this. So they are, kind of pairing them up to a certain degree for this book, to just have more scenes together to eventually build into will eventually make this the relationship going forward. So a lot of this is some of our very initial scenes of just seeing how these two actually interact together. And now that we're kind of past a lot of the romance stuff, which was kind of a large part of like why they maybe interacted in some of the earlier books, we can actually get to see what their dynamic is like together. So that's definitely one to focus on as like we go through the episodes, kind of highlighting what are the key Korra and Asami moments and when does things maybe begin to change a little bit. But I suppose more specifically, what are your thoughts here on just like clearly this is the start of what will eventually kind of turn into Korrasami?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as like a start, knowing where it ends up, it seems fine because they're just sort of like on a better sort of understanding here with each other, which I think is, a good start for things. So in terms of like, rather than a relationship just sort of like, starting off the drop of a hat or anything like that, like this feels like, a bit more of a better sort of progression in terms of that. Like, just the idea of them being together and sort of, trying to sort of like help Korra sort of like learn to drive, which is like a funny sort of awkward situation to be in. It's a nice little bit of levity that they have with each other here before anything serious starts to happen.
Mm-hmm. And then the other kind of more kind of emotional kind of side of this is definitely Tenzin's reaction and the scene with like his kids, when he figures out that there are other airbenders in the world as well. But once the doll reveal kind of comes out to Tenzin and he realizes it's not just some weird kind of family thing with Bumi and airbending, he is really taken by the emotion of this, that this is something he's waited for. It's something Aang always wanted, and the fact that he's kind of going to be the one to lead the air nomads into this potentially new era, if there are many more of them out there. And I like this moment here where like the kids are kind of confused about it as well. Like, what does this mean for us? We've always been the only airbenders in the world. Now there's going to be a lot more of us. We're going to have to be the ones to help those people. So things are going to change, but, they're going to do it together basically as a family. And it's really nice because like you see the tear in Tenzin's eye and the kids react to that. They don't maybe quite understand it on the level he does, but it's really impactful. Even like the Aang mention here and like noting that like well, first 170 years or something like that. I think he mentions like the first properly like new airbenders not from their family. Hugely kind of impactful kind of moment here. But what were your thoughts on the Tenzin and kids moment?
Yeah, no, that was a very sort of nice, sort of touching, sort of family airbender moment there because it definitely, speaks to volumes of sort of what sort of they, potentially envision for the future, which, wouldn't really have that many sort of airbenders. So it definitely, comes across here, especially with, sort of like all the pressure that, seemingly was put on Tenzin. And of course, he puts on himself for leading the Air Nation, which, was very small up until this point. It definitely comes full force here with what he's going to potentially have to do in the future, which is interesting to see, sort of how he deals with sort of the things that come up in the next episode. But yeah, it definitely is a nice moment here with them all together, just sort of understanding the change of things to come.
Mm-hmm. And that continues into the next scene where like Tenzin talks to Korra. Korra's feeling very down because she kind of she has this kind of very down moment where she feels like, well, am I wrong for having basically kind of initiated quite a lot of this change? Like, she's not responsible for everything that's happened, but she has made like a decision with the portals. She asks, was I wrong? But Tenzin praises her. Just like, no, you made your choice. I think it was the right choice. Especially me, I think it was the right choice because, when you make changes, especially as the Avatar, where you're thinking about balance of the entire world, that's maybe not going to be beneficial to everyone. but this has benefited like me. You've brought somehow airbenders back, and it does give her the idea that like, oh, that's one of the big changes that's positive. Like bringing back an entire one of the four nations is a huge thing. That is something she could focus on as the Avatar. Are there other airbenders out there? Likely. And so, yeah, when she is banished, it just kind of confirms to her that, yeah, I don't need to be in the city at all times. If they don't care, I'll leave and do something where I can, like, actually help out. Because she helped Daw and introduced him to Tenzin. She can do that with other people as well. And it's a really nice way to give Korra a kind of clear direction for the book, but also give Tenzin a clear direction as well of just, we're going on tour basically around the world, gathering up new airbenders. That's a really exciting kind of premise for the series overall. And just in general, like the Tenzin Korra scene, really nice kind of that very mature relationship continuing on from some of the really strong development from last book. So I like that they have just that continuation, that all that development is still here, that you can tell they're more on the same level now. It hasn't just like reverted back to Tenzin is Korra's teacher. No, they're both like world leaders basically. That's sort of more the idea here, which I like. But what are your thoughts on the Tenzin Korra scene?
Yeah, no, their dynamic has definitely evolved and progressed from before, where, you know, Korra was almost sort of like always put out with anything that Tenzin said, right? Like, but even here, like, you know, just the beginning of her, you know, attempting to meditate, and, you know, Tenzin understanding that, like, this means that, you know, something's not right because you would never do this sort of thing. I think, you know, even that sort of little insight before they even get to the real sort of conversation of things is a nice way to show that they're on a much more sort of, I guess you could say, like, level playing field. Like you're saying, you know, they're both sort of up there in terms of understanding the world and wanting it to be sort of a better place. And, you know, the idea that there are more airbenders can only mean that, you know, the world and sort of your role in terms of, you know, trying to bring balance to it, you know, is a good thing, you know, in the grand sort of scheme of things, even though, you know, Raiko and your approval rating and everything else is sort of, you know, on the down here. So I like that this is sort of the start of her really sort of understanding, you know, like you're saying, what her role is going to be in this book and how they're, you know, going to try to interact with people and meet them. And, you know, it's also just a nice way of getting Korra sort of out of the city and exposed to more different things and stuff like that, because, you know, up until now she hasn't really, you know, traveled like that. So this is a great way to actually get to see her, to go out there, and the fact that she can bring, you know, her crew with her, you know, is a great thing as well.
Mm-hmm. And then the last thing to talk about with this episode is the big thing at the end, the introduction of Zahir, who is another one of these new airbenders. It's a really surprise but incredible reveal right at the end, especially when you have the sort of context of like, this is who Zahir is, and this is why it was so notable. But yeah, he's in a White Lotus prison. We obviously get to see White Lotus guards kind of bringing him food, and they're obviously very cautious of him, even though they view him as a non-bender. He has to stay really far away from the bars when they send it in. So he's obviously dangerous even without bending. But then we see what he talks about. And he's like this airbending guru, Lahima. He reads them some kind of poetry about him. This is where we get a very interesting lore line about like Guru Lahima lived 4,000 years ago, which is like actually a super key line to understanding some stuff like what Pre-Four Nations is, that sort of idea. But the big thing here, he talks about how Guru Lahima unlocked the secret of weightlessness and became untethered from the earth, living his final 40 years without ever touching the ground. So a new airbending ability that we do get to see later on in the book, which is really, really exciting stuff. But then, yeah, he goes into it a lot more, talking about how instinct is a lie told by a fearful body hoping to be wrong. It means that when you base your expectations on what you see, you blind yourself to the possibilities of a new reality. And this is when he airbends and captures one of the guards, frees himself, defeats them. He escapes. He kind of jails his jailers, and he says that the end of the White Lotus is coming soon, and also the end of the Avatar. That it's going to be a new age now that he has airbending. So very interesting stuff here. The fact that, okay, it'd be one thing if he just said he's going to go after the Avatar, but he also specifically says the end of the White Lotus as well. So it's like, okay, the White Lotus is coming back into play as well. We have this kind of warrior poet character. What's he about? And we'll see over the coming episodes that it's not just him. It's a group, and there is some fascinating stuff going on with these characters. But what are your thoughts on Zahir's intros?
Yeah, no, I think the intro scene is great. I think this is one that always sort of stands out for people. He has this sort of, mentality and this perception of the world that I think is, it's interesting, intriguing. And, a lot of it, like, sometimes you can see sort of the reasons behind what he's doing. But then, he also goes to, sort of these extremes as well, which, of course, puts him at odds and ends with our core group here. So I think, it's definitely a lot to get these little nuggets and these history and how it plays out later on, considering things turn out, and the fact that he is now an airbender, and his ability to use this sort of new powers that he has in this sort of way here makes him just sort of a standout character that has everyone sort of talking about him, and why is he so good, how is he so good, and just sort of what is his real sort of background. So it's definitely, a great sort of character introduction, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things when you say that. It's just like we're still wondering a few of those things to a certain degree. It's like, like why is he interested in poetry, and specifically of an air nomad like Gurlahima from before? There is some of that backstory stuff that we just like simply don't know. It's not that it gets revealed later on, we just don't know it. Obviously he was some sort of an amazing non-bender fighter. We don't really get a sense for what his like skill set necessarily was as a non-bender, but clearly some sort of martial artist, because he has a foundation in that to be able to use that with his new airbending to develop something that resembles like an airbending form, even if it's not like the airbending that we know. It's enough to be powerful enough to take out White Lotus guards, which, as far as we're aware, are all like higher end masters of their elements. Sure, they're random White Lotus characters, but they're still meant to be master benders, is the idea here. So fascinating stuff here right at the end. And again, that idea of kind of the episode of the three new airbenders, one we know, one randomer, one villain, and the reaction to a lot of that. It's a really strong setup episode. But with that mostly brings the episode to an end. On the next podcast, depends on how things go. The next podcast might be our Mystery of Pension Island comic review. If news happens earlier, like before the comic comes out, it might be the next kind of review, kind of episode review show, maybe covering some news as well. But either way, when we come back to this, we'll be doing 2 episodes from Avatar. We'll be doing 215 and 216, which is Tales of Ba Sing Se and Appa's Lost Days, as well as the next episode of Korra Book 3, Rebirth. So that will be a pretty nice selection there. The 2 kind of experimental episodes in the Ba Sing Se arc with different formats, and just the continuation of Korra. So otherwise it's been myself and Greg. It's been episode 285 of the Avatar Online podcast. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.